Hello and welcome. I'm Ollie Law, Editor-in-Chief of Unbreakable Ventures, a threat landscape email that provides entrepreneurs and business leaders with resource to help them take on any disruption anywhere in the world. You are listening to our fortnightly risk email where we dive into emerging and current risks from around the world, focusing on some big stories and some you may have missed. We use the categories from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report to simplify the threats we're reporting on. But we also do some deep dives and interviews with industry peers, so make sure to check those out. It's Monday the 7th of April and we're discussing the top risks between the 24th of March and the 7th of April 2025, so grab a coffee and let's get into it. The overwhelming story across the world this week has been Trump's dramatic and completely outrageous tariffs imposed on over 150 countries. Yes, this is without a doubt the leading story in the global threat landscape, but I'm confident those listening will have plenty of oversight on the situation, and we certainly don't have much more to add than what is available to us today. That said, it's a situation that could be pivotal in how the next 5 to 10 years goes should Trump stick to his tariff war. So now is the time to prepare for a recession that resembles one similar to the COVID era 4 years ago. Andrew Chang's CBC News story talks about how trade experts and economists for The Atlantic calculated how the tariffs were set. They say the math is so misleading, experts reviewed it multiple times only to land on the same formula. So the method for calculating the so-called reciprocal tariffs significantly departed from standard trade practices. Rather than assessing actual tariffs or trade barriers, the administration relied on a basic formula. The US trade deficit in goods with a country divided by the total US imports of goods from that country expressed as a percentage. This percentage was then labeled as the tariffs charged to the USA, but the figure was misleading. It bundled together not only actual tariffs, but also non-monetary trade barriers and what the administration described as other forms of cheating. Here's where things really deviated from conventional trade policy though. First, the trade deficit was misinterpreted. Experts in international trade called this approach crude and misleading. The formula assumed that a trade deficit automatically meant a country was engaging in unfair trade practices, which simply isn't accurate. In reality, fair trade analysis would look at specific barriers like actual tariff rates, currency manipulation, or non-tariff restrictions. The Trump formula didn't attempt to measure any of those directly. Second, there was no direct link to actual tariffs. Take China, for example. The administration calculated a so-called 67.3% tariff rate, but this number had no relation to any Chinese tariff. It was purely a product of the formula, not of documented trade policy. And of course, China now has retaliated with their own tariff of around 34%. Third, the analysis lacked depth. Even when the administration released a slightly more complex looking formula later on, experts noted that it still boiled down to the same simple trade deficit over imports ratio. There were no economic models, no comparative analysis, and no rigorous groundwork, just a single percentage based on imbalance. Fourth, this approach led to problematic outcomes. The US began imposing reciprocal tariffs based on these inflated and inaccurate figures, often at around half the made-up rate. For example, if Vietnam was assigned a fictional 90% tariff rate, US negotiators would expect them to bring that down. But since that figure didn't reflect any real policy, there was no logical starting point for a negotiation. The focus was on fixing the trade imbalance, not addressing actual trade practices. Fifth, it punished countries with which the US had trade surpluses. In a particular odd twist, 115 countries with US trade surpluses were assigned an arbitrary 10% effective tariff rate. These were countries that, by Trump's own definition, weren't taking advantage of the US, yet they were still targeted with tariffs. The rationale behind this move wasn't explained. And finally, it skewed public perception. By promoting these figures as if they reflected actual tariff rates, the administration painted a false picture of global trade. This not only confused the public, but also made life harder for businesses trying to make informed decisions about supply chains and trade relationships. The Trump administration substituted the complex work of trade analysis with simplistic math problem, one that experts widely dismissed as flawed and disconnected from real-world policy. It's time to prepare for a few eventualities on how the global economy will move through this crisis. However, all eyes should be on Asia, who are the largest importers to US and will influence the markets the most. Anyway, moving on. This week, we also conducted a few additional interview podcasts. I sat down with Martin Petz of F24 to discuss the Signal Gate dramas coming out of the US. We focused more on the lessons learned from this story rather than the politics, and talked through some areas to consider for organisations who are using multiple communication tools. That'll be released in a few days, so keep an eye out for that. I also sat down with Brad Law, co-founder of Fix Inc., to discuss the measles outbreak and how this should be a reason to start reviewing your pandemic plans and consider your work from home procedures. That's out now, so head to wherever you get your podcasts from, or you can go to Unbreakable Ventures to take a listen. Before we head into our other three main stories today, please share Unbreakable Ventures with your contacts and peers. We don't charge for this content, there's no spam, we don't advertise services. It's designed to inform and support those who are interested in the threat landscape. But enough about that, let's talk about some emerging risks this last fortnight. This week, we learned that AI doesn't just repeat what it knows, it repeats what it's been fed, and someone's been feeding it lies. Recent findings reveal that a Russian disinformation network called Pravda, which means truth in Russian, has been flooding the web with millions of fake articles. But this time, they're not targeting you, they're targeting your AI. Over 3.6 million articles across 150 plus fake news sites in 49 countries, all designed to be scooped up by large language models. And guess what? It worked. A study found that 10 major AI chatbots from OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and Meta repeated Russian propaganda 33% of the time when asked about world events. One AI even claimed Ukraine banned Trump's Truth Social app, a completely fake story, citing one of Pravda's dummy sites as a source. This is AI poisoning in action, manipulating what the machines know by gaming the data they train on. And it's not just happening from Russia. China's developing chatbots that self-censor on politically sensitive topics like Xinjiang or Tiananmen Square. Iran and other actors have been caught using AI to mass-produce fake news and personas. And in 2023, researchers uploaded Poison GPT, a tampered language model designed to quietly spread falsehoods. So why should you care? Because if you rely on AI for research, decision support, customer service, and it's pulling from poisoned data, you're not just misinformed, you're at risk. We're talking reputation hits from AI's echoing face narratives, financial losses driven by flawed insights, even compliance issues if you act on false or manipulated information. This is a data supply chain issue, and like any supply chain, if your inputs are compromised, so is your output. Here's what to do. Verify your tools. Ask vendors how they protect against misinformation in their training data and models. Cross-check critical outputs. Don't let AI answers go unchallenged. Monitor behavior. If responses shift or sound skewed, investigate them. It's very easy to spend 5 to 10 minutes investigating and researching those responses just to see the accuracy rate from your own analysis. And train your team to stay sharp. AI is powerful, but it's not immune to manipulation. The machines are listening, and now so are the bad actors. You may have noticed on your LinkedIn feeds these last few weeks an increasing number of receipts being posted. A new type of fraud is making its way into company expense reports, and surprise, surprise, it's powered by AI. With OpenAI's latest image editing update, anyone, not just designers or tech pros, can now create fake photorealistic receipts that are almost impossible to spot with the naked eye. We're talking about receipts that look wrinkled, aged, maybe sitting on a wooden table that resembles a restaurant. It comes with realistic numbers, itemized bills, and even logos of that restaurant. And the kicker, the math actually checks out. All it takes is a prompt like, generate a wrinkled $200 receipt from Epic Steakhouse in San Francisco, and boom, ChatGPT makes it happen. But let's be honest, expense fraud has always been a thing. But before, you needed Photoshop skills or access to tools most employees didn't have. And this comes with a footprint that can be investigated. But now, you just need a prompt. Experts are already seeing the fallout. AI-generated receipts made up nearly 15% of all fraudulent expenses in 2024, up 300% from 2 years before that. And that's just what's been caught. So how does fraud actually work? There are four main things getting manipulated. The merchant info, so the restaurant name, address, maybe even a logo. The transaction details, so dates, items ordered, times, all look realistic. The totals, so taxes, tips, and everything adds up properly. And the look, the texture of the paper, creases, shadows, it feels real. And that means businesses are now on the hook for paying out fake expenses, which adds up fast, of course. Tax issues, those fake receipts could lead to false deductions, trust breakdowns with employees, and an overhead spike just to try and verify what's real or not. But there is some good news. Detection tools are catching up. Companies like Ramp are using metadata scanning to flag AI-generated files. Verify's OCR tech can detect ChatGPT, DALL-E, and Stable Diffusion receipts with a 99.7% accuracy. Some systems now compare receipts across submissions to catch duplicates or inconsistencies invisible to human reviewers. In Europe, a built-in advantage already exists. Most receipts include QR codes tied to tax authorities, making them verifiable at the source. That's not the case everywhere, of course, but it's a model worth looking at that we could replicate anywhere in the world. So what can you do right now? First, audit your process. If you're still manually reviewing expense claims, you are already behind. Second, consider implementing AI-based receipt validation tools. These aren't just nice to haves anymore, they're probably essential. And third, educate your team. Most employees won't commit fraud, but those tempted by AI's convenience might think it's low risk. Make sure they know it's not. The line between real and fake has never been blurrier. AI tools are making fraud easier, faster, and more convincing. But with smart policies, the right tools, and a bit of healthy skepticism, you can stay ahead of the curve and ahead of the forgeries. Our top risk this week concerns a breach that's not just big, but quietly dangerous, and one that Oracle doesn't really want you to know about. It's the kind of breach that makes security teams sweat, especially when the vendor says everything's fine, while the evidence piles up that it definitely isn't. This risk update relates to the massive Oracle data breach, one that's being called one of the most underreported breaches in recent history. So what happened? And more importantly, what should you be doing about it? Let's break it down. A hacker going by the name of Rose87168 claims to have breached Oracle's cloud systems back in March. Not just any system, but Oracle's identity platform, the one that manages logins and authentication for its cloud services. They got their hands on over 6 million customer records. That includes SSO credentials, hash passwords, OAuth 2 keys, and a whole bunch of internal Oracle customer data. To prove it, they posted a list of over 144,000 affected companies. Then came the twist. The hacker didn't just expose it, they offered companies a choice. Pay a ransom to have your data removed from the trove, or we sell it to the highest bidder. A classic ransomware case. So what did Oracle say? They denied it, flat out. Told the public there was no breach. Meanwhile, cybersecurity firms started confirming the leaked data was legitimate. Real credentials, real companies. Privately, Oracle started telling a different story, that the breach affected an older platform, Oracle Cloud Classic is what it was called. But investigators say some of the stolen credentials go right up to 2024. So yeah, classic indeed. If you're a business using Oracle Cloud, or if your team relies on single sign-on through Oracle, this one's for you and you need to act immediately. IT teams, security leads, system admins, you need to assume compromise and start from there. So here's why this matters. First, this is a cyber attack on a major infrastructure provider. The hacker hasn't leaked everything yet, but they're threatening to. That puts thousands of businesses in limbo. Second, this highlights a third-party risk scenario. Even if your own systems are locked, your vendor's breach becomes your problem. And third, there's theft and malicious activity at play. If these credentials are cracked, and the hacker's crowdsourcing helps to do it, you could be looking at follow-on attack or access into critical cloud systems. And here's the kicker, a breach like this doesn't affect data. It can hit your operations, your reputation, and your customers' trust. I shouldn't have to remind you about what happened with CrowdStrike and the Microsoft outage. So what can you do? Let's talk mitigation. Step 1, find out if your domain or team is affected. If Oracle hasn't contacted you, don't wait. Check threat intel sources, talk to your security provider, or go straight to Oracle support. Step 2, reset credentials. Treat all linked accounts as compromised. Change passwords, rotate auth keys, invalidate keys. Don't wait for the breach to unfold, get ahead of it. Step 3, enable MFA. If it's not already on, turn it on. It's your first line of defense if credentials are floating around out there. And step 4, monitor everything. Look for unusual logins, odd network behavior, or attempts to use your old credentials. Get alerts running and keep eyes on the system. And finally, update your incident response plans. Add vendor breach scenarios, prepare comms, make sure you know what to do before a third-party breach becomes your breach. So, to wrap it up, Oracle may not want to talk about this breach, but the rest of us will be. This is a lesson in vendor risk, in poor transparency, and in how fast things can spiral when identity platforms are compromised. Whether or not you're directly impacted, this is a perfect time to reassess your cloud strategy, your supplier contracts, and how prepared you really are when someone else drops the ball. Because in a world where your weakest link might be someone else's server, resilience isn't just internal, it's collective. We'll report further on this story in the coming days in an article update, so keep an eye out for that. That's it for today's update. If you need help navigating these threats or building a plan to protect your business, the same advisors who collate these insights are here to help. Head over to unbreakableventures.com to book a complimentary chat online with one of them. And if you found this resource useful, consider subscribing to Unbreakable Ventures or sharing the article to your LinkedIn network or wherever you chat with your peers. After all, resilience is about community and communication. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, stay safe.
Unbreakable Ventures is brought to you by the senior advisory team at Fix Inc., a boutique resilience advisory based in Oceania and the ASEAN region. Special thanks to Europe's leading SaaS provider for resilience software, F24. Our articles are researched and published by industry specialists across New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia, and the United Kingdom. This podcast provides advice and information on disaster recovery and the threat landscape. The content is not a substitute for expert guidance during a crisis. Unbreakable Ventures is a publication operated by Fix Inc. Consulting Partners, a Fix Inc. Group company.